Morning, this is Merrily Enquist with Oregon Small Woodlands Historic Project, and I'm speaking today with Bob Kintigh, who was president of Oregon Small Woodlands Association from 1968 to 1971. I'm down here near Springfield at his mountain home ranch, and good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
And we'll just...
Beautiful day.
It is, and getting prettier by the minute as the fog rises out here. Let me ask you a few questions to get started. Since you're past president of OSWA and a longtime Oregon State Senator and a forester, there are many interesting areas for us to discuss. And let's begin maybe with your background as a forester. What got you interested initially, and eventually you became a graduate forester? So kind of fill me in.
Well, my interest in forestry was turned back to junior high. I decided when I was in 7th or 8th grade that I wanted to be a forester, and never varied from that goal and pursued it. Fact is, it was interesting. I went to my high school 50th reunion. One of the women told my wife that I was the only person that knew what he wanted to do, and did it. So my interest started way back there. While I was raised on a dairy farm, we did have an area of that we had done some reforestation work on, and I planted my first trees when I was only 10 years old, and helped my dad plant some pine trees on a farm on an area that was not farmable due to the coal having been taken out. But I went on then after graduating high school to Penn State and got my degree in forestry there, and then I went into the Navy, served 3 years in the Navy as a line officer and saw considerable action in major naval battles in the Pacific. And then after getting out of the Navy, I went to spent a year at the University of California at Berkeley, where I got a master's in forest management under some of the real old-time foresters like Mulford and Baker and Barr and Kittredge and some of those that are well-known names at least among the older foresters.
So, and then since about 1957, you've owned Kintigh's Mountain Home Ranch here, starting, I understand, with a stump ranch. And in the nearly 40 years that you've been working on this, you've turned it into a beautiful tree farm. Would you tell me the story kind of behind this whole development?
Well, yes, we came to the Eugene area in '47 after I finished graduate school, and where I worked for different consulting firms and did a lot of different things, and worked also had a cabinet shop for a while, and even worked for the Bureau of Land Management for several years. But we've been looking, well, first off, we wanted to get out in the country, and then our hand was forced on it because the building of Interstate Highway, Interstate 5, took out our home, which was north of Eugene. So when you go down I-5 now, you go over where we used to live, near the Gateway area. So we were looking for acreage in the country, and we found this one. 160 acres was for sale. There was not much on it, a couple old barns and a half-finished house. And we could have bought either the 80 or 160, and we anguished over that. And fortunately, we decided to buy the 160 at a price that today would look ridiculous. So, but to say that it was stump pasture, bracken fern, and about half of it was covered with about 15-year-old reproduction, very, very heavily stocked, but and very good site. So that's one of the things that made me real interested in the place. And it's that this stand that we have now thinned 4 times and have a beautiful stand of timber there now, about 55 years old. The rest of the property that wasn't in forest, we cleared out the stumps and have converted that to Christmas tree production, and have been reasonably successful in growing different kinds of trees and growing high quality Christmas trees.
Good.
Might say too that all the buildings on the place, every one of them that's here now, we built, and so it's all been done since we came here.
Yes, I saw several buildings. I was driving in here today.
The 2 barns that were here originally blew down in the Columbus Day storm in '62, so that was the end of them.
Well, if they blew down, I guess it was time to go. My informants tell me that at least part of your family, you have 5 children, correct?
Yes.
That 2 of the children are involved here on the tree farm. Now, how have you managed to bring your family into this operation? I know some people want to, and it works, and then other people, you know, how did it work out for you?
Well, I don't know that we did anything special. I mean, all the children worked, and I complained about it when they were little. I complained that they were the only kids on the hill that had to work. But
too bad.
It turned out for the best. They're all good workers now. But the 2 older boys have gone into other things. One of them's fleet manager for Williams Bakery, and another is a mechanic for Schwab. But the 2 youngest boys stayed and worked with me. And then about 3-4 years ago, we formally took them into a partnership with my wife and I, and then we're now gradually giving them more and more of the business. And actually, they're actually pretty much running the Christmas tree and nursery operation. I should probably point out that our operation here is sort of threefold, you might say. We have the timber, and which I still have as my own. And then we have the Christmas tree operation, and then we have a nursery operation. We have a container nursery here, and then we have a transplant nursery at my son's farm. He lives on a farm down by Cottage Grove. So we have a 3-pronged, or 3 enterprises, you might say. And but the Christmas trees and nursery are being run pretty much by Mark and Dan now. I'm not involved at all actually in day-to-day management, although we do get together and do long-range planning and talk things over. But I don't have to be here for it to run, and so that was why I was able to run for the legislature, because they could run that business.
Now, is the nursery part of this ornamentals, or are you growing forest trees, or what?
The nursery part is largely for reforestation, seedlings for reforestation, but we do sell quite a bit to Christmas tree growers too, but it's been moving the last few years more and more to reforestation stock, and due to the increase in logging on private lands, there's been a good demand for that, and particularly, and we specialize in raising seedlings for the nearby area to satisfy the local market. We don't attempt to raise seedlings for people in all parts of the state. I don't think any nursery should do that. Specialize in your own area. So Douglas fir from zone 262 is one of our big things. Another big item is the so-called Valley Ponderosa pine. I think we were probably the first nursery to raise that. We've been raising them for a long time, and before some of these other people got on the bandwagon, we were already driving the wagon. And so we've been raising them for a long time. We can show you plantations that are 15, 20 feet high of seedlings that we raised some years ago. So that's what our stock is. We have the nursery here at this place is containers, and the other one is a transplant nursery. We raise take the small seedlings from the containers and transplant them and leave them there, and we grow a nice big transplant seedling that way.
Okay. Let's see. Well, you've let's talk a little bit more specifically about, do you have any words of wisdom for others who want to bring family members into their operation of the tree farm?
Well, I guess just from the time they're small, I guess you just try to show them, talk to them about it, and show them the importance, and try to get them interested. I don't know. I didn't consciously do anything special, but I don't know. Maybe they just inherited an interest in it. And then my wife and I are both plant people, and they got interested in plants. And my wife is a botany graduate, so we both have great interest in plants, more than animals. You notice there's no dog around here, no cats.
No dog, no cat. But 500 rhododendrons.
Yes.
Which we're going to have a look at.
Many kinds of flowers and plants. And you can see that here, stuff my wife has in the planter there. So all around the house there's all kinds of rare and unusual plants. So I guess they maybe just, some of it just sort of rubbed off, but yeah.
Sounds like you started early and just did a good job.
Well, they started early. I know when we used to retail Christmas trees here, they'd be out there helping. I can remember Danny out there, I mean, about 4 years old, talking to customers and explaining the difference between a pine and a fir to adults.
Okay. That answers my question about how you got him started. Just start early. And it sounds like he worked out well. Now, to move to more recent times maybe, you were OSWA, Oregon Small Woodlands Association state president from 1968 to 1971. Now, how would you describe the organization at that time? Was it a pretty big organization? And how did it differ from what we're doing today in our organization?
Well, those are little tough questions to answer.
I can't give you all easy
Going
ones.
back in the, I didn't keep notes or a diary. So a lot of these things in that span of time, that's 25 years or so, get a little foggy. But my recollection is that it was an active, enthusiastic organization. It was not near the size it is now. It did not include as big a territory. It was mostly here in the Willamette Valley area. I don't have any real idea of what the membership was, but I'm guessing it could have been in 300-400, but I can't prove that one way or the other. But I think there was a good spirit and interest in knowing how to better manage their timberlands. Certainly, log prices in those days were no ways near what they are now. I can remember when log prices went to $100 a thousand, and we were all looking at each other and saying, "Well, should I clear cut now? We'll never see 100 again." But we didn't.
Fortunately.
Yeah. As for how it differs from the days, I guess I don't know. That basic interest in philosophy, I don't think has changed too much. It's just as a bigger organization, we have paid staff now, which we didn't then. Everything was volunteer. So the scope of the activities and programs weren't as big. We, of course, didn't have a paid magazine like we do now, and things like that. But these things were all things that just developed gradually over the years. So you don't run until you can walk, and so that's association sort of just grew. But I think we had a good core group there, was dedicated, and I think that we did grow steadily.
Well, that's what's important. I always ask each past president the same question. When would you say OSWA first began? And I'm feel sure that it started in some of the individual counties, but I'm still a little bit unsure as to when it first became a state organization. You want to address some of those questions?
I think I can. Since I was I think I'm one of the few survivors of the organizational committee. Now, you're right, there were some county organizations. There was an organization here in Lane County. There was one in Clackamas County. And may have been, I think maybe one in Columbia County. I'm not sure, or they had a formal organization or not. But I know Lane and Clackamas did. And that may have been the extent of county organizations at that time. But then there in the mid 60s, well, there was an attempt made to get a state organization, and so there was an ad hoc committee formed, and we met numerous times. I can remember going to a good many meetings where we hammered out the constitution for the organization, and so I think that was really the start of that, because after we got that together, and then we had formal organization, that's when we elected the first state president. It was Buck Nash, who was also president of the Lane County organization, which had been going on for some years. Then when Buck resigned in Lane County, I was elected to his place, and of course then I became a director on the state board, and then I was elected president then. So I see that as the time that it really became a state organization.
About the time of Buck Nash, then. We got
Yeah,
our first president, and started to
just
really
before
do something
that.
statewide.
I say it's hard for me to remember just how long a period we met. It was a period of time that we worked on this and finally got things together.
Okay. Who do you recall? I'm sure you won't be able to name maybe everybody, but who do you recall, who comes to mind just right off, that were early Oregon Small Woodlands Association leaders?
Well, I can remember some of them, but I know there's a lot of them that I don't remember, because I can visually picture yet in my mind the group that sat around the table hammering out this organizational plan, and I know there's more than I can name now, but Buck Nash, as I've just mentioned, is one of them. Vern Bronson, who was from the Junction City area, Forestry, who I was in business with, and was a small woodland owner. He passed away some years ago, but he has a son as a forester for Bohemia, or now Willamette Industries. Lou Polly, that is up at Marcola, who's an old timer in that area, has had a tree farm there for many years, and he was one of the ones that was active in Lane County from the very beginning. Lou worked for many years with the Eugene Water and Electric Board, and is also somewhat of a historian. He's written a book on the history of the Mohawk Valley. Still active. He retired, but active. And then there was Fay Richardson, the man from out in the Fall City area that his daughter recently gave their tree farm to the Oregon State. Had a nice place out there. And then there was another Richardson, I can't remember his first name, from up in the Scotts Mills area. Everett Skeens, I believe, was involved. At least he was, I'm not sure he was on this organizational committee, but I know he was one of the early active people. Then there was a guy named Ed Grosh from down at Grants Pass. who passed away a few years back. But I do remember of Ed being involved in this committee. And I believe Clyde Ramsey was active in early days there too. And I do remember Don Mulrod being early secretary, and I believe Don, I feel pretty sure that Don probably met with this organizational committee too, but I can't swear to it. I say, going back that far and with no records, but those are some names that come to mind that I know were in on the early organizational times.
That's a good list. I recognize a few of those names. When you were president of OSWA, oh, we're going to wait for the beautiful clock here. When you were president of OSWA, there must have been some forest issues with which you had to struggle at that time. What were some of those major concerns that were back there in the late 60s and going on into the 70s?
Well, one I remember very vividly, and because it hit me right off the start when I got elected president up at St. Helens, and that was log exports.
Oh,
and
okay.
It's still around.
Sounds kind of familiar to me.
But I remember at that meeting us passing a resolution supporting our right to export if we so desired. And so that was a prominent issue at that time. I remember getting calls from the press and so forth about our resolution and so forth. And I was pretty new at all this, being a president of state organization, something I'd never been before. And so that was one of the things. And land use issues also were a problem too, or a concern at that time. And there was some difference of opinion in the organization. Those are the only things I really can remember. There probably were others that were, strictly speaking, issues, but I think our major concerns would have included just helping people to do a better job of managing their lands and helping them in legislative matters, helping them to be represented in Salem.
Okay. You know, unlike the other presidents that I've already visited this year, you've been a legislative leader, a senator since, 1987?
Yes.
And during those years that you were at the legislature, I'm sure you worked on numerous key issues that directly affected forestry. Can you recall some of those instances for me?
Well, yes. A couple of them have been, a couple times we have revised the Forest Practices Act, and I was very heavily involved in that. I might say here that I am the only forester to have ever served in the Oregon Senate. That's almost an unbelievable statistics when you figure how important forestry is in this state. There have been several foresters that have served in the House, but I'm the only one that's ever served in the Senate. So my knowledge of forestry issues enabled me to make some definite contributions in the Forest Practices Act, and also I'm able to, shall we say, sort of hold in check some of the people on the other side, some of the extremists, and I'm able to, when they come in and give testimony that isn't accurate, why, with my background and knowledge, I'm able to question them and point out some things that sometimes they get a little surprised to find someone there that knows something about these issues.
Okay.
So I think I've made a real contribution there. And just one example, a way I've been able to bring in the small woodland viewpoint, and I have done that a number of times, but for example, in the last revision of the Forest Practices Act, the requirement was set up that you leave 2 trees or snags and 2 logs per acre on clear cuts. Well, I got in an exemption for clear cuts to less than 10 acres. And this is something that's real helpful to a small woodland owner, because most of us, while we make clear cuts, we don't make huge clear cuts. And so this is a little thing that helps us. Mm-hmm. And there have been other areas I've worked, helping get, working some with the hardwood industry to help them with some of their problems, including getting them together with the nursery industry and on planting stock when they want to plant alder, and there's just little things all along the way that I'm able to help out, and I sort of help the rest of my caucus on forestry issues, and they look to me for leadership and how to vote sometimes on things related to forestry. I've also worked on legislation for the nursery industry, for the Christmas tree industry as well, and since I understand those industries, and they've been real grateful for some of the things I've done, and I appreciate that.
That sounds good. Well, it can't be having somebody up there who actually has some experience and some knowledge, because you know, sometimes the best intentions are not really what we need. We need actual good forestry.
In the next session, that is in the 95 session, I will be chairman of the Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Environment Committee. And I will be the first person in recent memory that came from a rural and resource background. Previous chairmen have been like the Portland lawyers or professors of Portland State, TV producer, people that of entirely different walks of life, while sincere and bright people don't have a full understanding of people from rural areas and how people in rural areas feel about legislation and regulation and those things. So I think that it'll be a little different.
Well, I think we're grateful for the fact that you're going to be there and take over that leadership role. I think that's a good thing. Everything seems to go in cycles, and right now, as you know, we're in a period of really intense change, or it feels that way. And there's a lot of public intervention in private management of forests, and there's considerable concern right now. Can you provide me any historic perspective on this situation?
Well, the public regulation, or desire to have public regulation of cutting and management of private forest land actually goes back nearly 100 years. Actually, Gifford Pinchot, who's much revered by many people and was a fine forester, was felt that the government should regulate private forestry. And this was a battle in the early days of our country, and there was another man named Greeley, who later became chief of the Forest Service too, and then went into private one moment later. But Greeley had the opposite, or a very different viewpoint, and he favored a different approach rather than regulation, trying to educate people and show them how to do it, and take a softer hand. And so that's then in the 30s again, Bernard Silcox, I believe it was chief of the Forest Service, and again there was proposals under the Roosevelt administration that he served to regulate private forest land again. I can remember when I was in school in the early 40s, this was a subject of considerable debate, whether or not we should have regulation of private forestry land. So you see, it's not a new issue, but it has become in some ways a little more intense in recent years here with such things as the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act and the salmon situation, which we get a lot of blame for. I don't think we deserve. But all these things have maybe brought a little different focus on it, as well as the perceived, and I emphasize perceived, overcutting of private lands. But I think we've got good statistics that show we're growing trees like crazy. But there are people that don't. Closely related to the issue of regulation is the matter of taking too. They sort of somewhat go together, and by that I'm talking about the people that just think that we should, I say as landowners, that it's our obligation to just leave huge blocks of trees or certain areas, or particularly streamside stuff, just for the for other benefits. Now, not that we are oblivious to the other values of the forest, and we do try to protect them. For example, I kept vegetation along the stream down through my property here 35, 40 years ago, before most people knew what the word riparian meant. So landowners are concerned and do look at the other values and try not to pollute our streams or have erosion. But still, that's a little different to have somebody come along and tell you that you should leave 200 feet or 300 feet along every little stream on your property. I remember one time when this was under discussion at one of our committees, and there was a representative there of the Audubon Society, and I says, well, let's just suppose that we got a landowner out here who's got 40 acres of timber, and it just happens a couple streams come down through that, and this is very easily possible, and now you want to take, say, 200-300 feet off of each one of those as they go through the property there. And I says, well, now say this could figure out to be, say, 30 or 40% of that timber. Now, do you think that the landowner should just donate 30-40% of his assets? The guy says yes, without hesitating. Well, I look at my timberland as my retirement, and if I have to give up 30 or 40% of it, well, that's going to hurt. And I'm sure that these people that advocate this, should someone ask them to chip in 30 or 40% of their retirement funds, why, they raise a fuss. So I think this is probably the one of the hottest issues facing us in the immediate future. I think this matter of just how much of our land, how much of our production do we going to have to give up for these other uses. Now, I happen to believe that with careful management, we can preserve these other uses without giving up the huge amounts of production that some of these people think. There is no real evidence that these wide buffers, for example, are going to help the fish any more in a much narrower strip, or just good careful management and protecting our streams. So there's no sound basis for it. So why should we be asked to give up a crop that we grew? So I see that as one of the key things that we're facing now.
Yes, it has always kind of bothered me that just because it happened, our crop happened to be trees, that we came under this scrutiny. This always struck me as being a little strange.
Well,
And I'm going to ask you another question. It's not on the list, but you can respond to it or not. But aren't there constitutional issues as well here? The right to have and to hold and enjoy the quiet enjoyment thereof of your properties and so forth. This doesn't usually come into the discussion. Do you want to comment on that, or am I off base?
No, I don't think you're off base a bit. And the Fifth Amendment or the Fifth and the Bill of Rights, the Fifth Amendment, speaks to that says that private property shall not be taken without compensation. But I was just reading recently just how that's how the courts have just gradually drifted away from that, and just little by little the interpretations become looser and looser. And I think the courts, I'm talking about the Supreme Court, and actually this started in the early 1900s when there was a definite movement. Before that it was pretty strict, literal interpretation. But now it seems that they're bringing in more and more the so-called public interest or the public good, and if you still have something left, they sort of interpret, well, it wasn't really a taking. But I see a little bit of a swing back, and I hope there'll be more. Certainly the Dolan case in Tigard
I was going to ask you about that one.
was a small movement in the right direction, and then we have a case, beach case in California, the case in North Carolina. So there have been some cases recently where there's starting to be a recognition that the government has to make a better case for taking it. So, and there are groups that are working on this, the Pacific Legal Foundation, for example, that worked on a Dolan case. Groups such as this are getting into the battle, and while we'll never turn it clear around, I think maybe we'll get things turned around some and have more recognition of the rights of people, of property owners. As I say, I'm not saying that we don't have any responsibility to manage our land in a good way. I think we do, but still, if we're taking the risk and producing a product, I think we should have the right to manage it in any reasonable fashion.
And paying the property taxes.
Yes.
Which are considerable.
You know, a few years ago, I paid my property taxes, which running to several thousands of dollars, and my wife says, I told her that I paid them from the timber receipts I made that year. And that was the time in the owl situation. We were threatened with a suit on an owl here, along with a number of other landowners in this area. And my wife wrote a letter to the editor about if we weren't able to cut timber to pay our taxes, would the owls pay our taxes?
Right.
Well, if we can't cut some trees, we can't pay our taxes.
That's true. Lots of concerns, and I think public what we're going to do about handling private ownership of property and how we're going to protect that is definitely going to become a hot item over the next few years.
This is under some discussion already in our caucus too, and
Good.
for the coming session, I think we're going to do a few things. One bill that we may be introducing would be the guarantee a person who plants a crop of trees the right to harvest it. So how far we can get with that, or how strong we can make it, I don't know at this stage, but that's one of the things that Senator Johnson and I are looking at.
Good for you. All right. During your term in office as president of OSWA, we're kind of going back to that, what accomplishments gave you particular great satisfaction? Were there some you wanted to...
Well, as I said earlier, my memory's a little bit hazy on this, but I think probably the continuing growth of the association and reaching out and helping more people do a good job of management and helping some in legislative areas. I believe were probably the key things at that time.
Okay. The small woodland owners and managers today have lots of challenges. We've talked about a lot of them today: the riparian area controls, the export controls, tax changes, forest management, on and on and on. There's a lot of regulation out there. And you know all of this better than I do. Would you get out your crystal ball and kind of give us a few thoughts about what do you see as the future, maybe for the next 10, 20 years? That's pretty short term in terms of forestry, but
Yes.
What do you see as our future for forestry here in the Northwest as far as small woodland owners are concerned?
Well, I'd like to think that things will the pendulum will swing back a little further, or back the other way. I think the recent election, and I may sound a little partisan in this, but I think the recent election has shown that people are maybe would like to see a little change too. And with here in Oregon, well, we've got the Republicans in charge of the legislature for the first time in 40 years, and I know the feeling in the Senate Republican caucus is while there's people of different views, but basically we're free enterprise, private property rights people in that group. I say some would go a little further than others, but basically that's where our caucus would come down, which is quite in contrast to many of our liberal colleagues with the other party from the urban areas. The liberal urbanites tend to think it's just perfectly fine that they can regulate us, and part of it, I believe, stems from the fact that in cities, because the concentration of people and different things, they have more regulations, and they need more regulations. The more people you got together, the more you're going to have regulations. I mean, if there was only 10 cars on the highway between here and Eugene, you wouldn't need speed laws, stoplights, or anything. But as you get more people, more cars, you need more and more regulation. So, of necessity, there's more regulation of property and things like that in people's lives in cities. But they feel it's perfectly fine that we have intensive regulations too. And I say this I believe is an honest viewpoint of theirs. So they don't have the appreciation that we do. And the other thing, they don't recognize that we're out here on the land making our living off of it. And we're smart enough to know that if we don't take care of it, we're not going to have a good living very long. And this is a concept that I don't think that, in all honesty, they understand or grasp. They think they need to tell us how to do each little step of the way. But anybody, and there's always a few bad apples, but most landowners know that they're going to have to take care of the land if they want to stay in business. Farmers farm certain ways, do contour farming and cover crop and do things like this because they know that they got to keep that soil. And the same with forestry. We can't let our roads rut out. That's not good business. We maintain our roads and do different things on our property. Plant good planting stock. Do brush control. It's in our own interest to do that. So I'd like to think that maybe there'll be a swing back. Some, of course, we aren't in complete control of our destiny in Oregon. so many of these things like the owl and the salmon are really nationalized issues that, we're sort of somewhat helpless to do much about them.
Mm-hmm.
We can try to persuade Congress to do this and that, and hopefully now with more people from the Northwest of this persuasion, maybe some of these things can change a little. And so that's, I guess, the best I could say on that.
Okay.
I would say this too, though, that I think that the demand for forest products, I believe, will continue strong, especially if cutting continues to be limited on federal lands. The market for our products from private land certainly will remain good. Our prices will remain relatively high. So it will mean that we can practice intensive forestry. I've often said, and this is provable, that the intensity of forest management is related directly to markets. If you can't sell marginal products, you can't practice intensive forestry. For example, years ago, we couldn't sell logs under 8 inches, and then we got down to 6 inches, and now we can sell stuff down to 2-inch tops. Well, this enables us to go in and thin stands that we didn't used to be able to thin. We don't make a lot of money on it, but if it pays its way, we benefit the stand. I would just love to have had the market 30, 35 years ago that we have now for small materials. So as markets have intensified and prices gotten better, more of this marginal material that we used to have to leave in the woods, we can take out and get a few bucks for. So we can practice more intensive forestry. I think this will continue to be the case, that we'll be able to afford to do things that we didn't used to be able to do.
So some cautious optimism there.
Yeah.
All right. Who are the people that you would name to your personal list of outstanding woodland owner managers? And also, who are the people who have influenced your thinking about forestry?
Well, I really hate to start naming names because I know I'm going to leave out some. But some of the ones that I think have been friends, and I've been on their farms and know about their management, that I feel have done a good job, are Wendell Harmon and Clyde Ramsey, Bob Maley, Bert Udell, Everett and Bob Skeens. I guess it's Bob now. I think Bob's running the show. Sam Connie here in Lane County, and Steve Woodard, and Lou Pauley that I mentioned earlier, Mark Cola. And when Buck Nash was living, of course, he was did a good job in his land. So those are some that I didn't think of that do a good job of forest management. As far as people that have influenced my thinking on forestry, I can't really name anyone. I've picked up little things from here and there, and of course with my forestry education, I had a pretty strong background there, and but my management principles are built on what I've learned there, plus what I've observed and visiting many other small owners as well as industrial tree farms. I'm one of these people that likes to go on field trips and see what things are being done, and as well as observing the results of my own management. I have set up permanent plots on my property and keep track of them, so I can see what results I'm getting from my own management projects.
Okay. Well, let's kind of conclude here, maybe with one last question. My research tells me that you've been really active in the National and the Northwest Christmas Tree Organization. you want to talk a little bit about what's been going on there and what some of your
All right.
contributions have been and so forth? I'm kind of interested in that.
Well, my involvement in the Northwest Christmas Tree Association goes back much further than the Oregon Small Ribbons. It goes back to about the mid-50s.
Mm-hmm.
And along about the late 50s or maybe early 60s, I served as secretary of that association for some years. And I've seen that association grow from about 50 members when I started to around 800-900 now.
Mm-hmm.
I've been active there mostly in the research committee and helping conduct genetic research, developing seed sources
Mm-hmm.
for superior Christmas trees. That's where most of my activity has been involved there.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a frequent exhibitor at the Christmas Tree Fair in Portland and have won, I think, my share of blue ribbons on trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the National Association, I've been a member there many, many years. I've been a supporter. I haven't really served on committees there, but I've been to some of their national conventions. And in 1992, I took a tree to their I was the Oregon representative. My tree was chosen to represent Oregon for the national competition. In 1992, my tree was picked as national grand champion tree.
Mm-hmm.
And with that goes the privilege of providing a tree for the White House. That is done at your own expense.
That's a privilege. Yes. Okay.
That's the privilege. You don't get any monetary reward, but it is quite an honor. And so we were visited by two people from the White House staff, the chief usher and the groundskeeper, who came out to look at the trees that I had to offer. Fortunately, I had 3 trees that met the size requirement most growers would not have.
How large was that?
Had to be 18.5 feet.
Ooh,
No less, because it had to touch the ceiling in a blue room.
aha.
And that was the first requirement. But we had several very lovely grand fir here, and they picked the one that I would have picked anyhow. And we had a wonderful visit with them here. 2 very, very fine fellows. And of course, the groundskeeper, Mr. Williamson, we showed him around our place here, and he was very much interested in that. So then, subsequently, in last of November, the tree was cut and shipped by UPS. UPS donated flying the tree back there. United Airlines was going to, but they didn't have a plane big enough.
Oh no!
UPS is the largest cargo fleet of planes in the world. So they graciously, a local trucking company, Reed's Fuel Trucking, trucked it to Portland, and then their UPS flew it to back to Baltimore Washington Airport.
And I suppose a tree that large you can't put through the tree baling machine.
We got it through the baler.
Oh, you did?
I'm telling you, it was nip and tuck. We had to use a come along to get it through. But there were some people who were worried for a little bit. We had the media here, the TV, and everybody.
Oh.
They were sure we weren't going to make it, but we did. It was a huge tree to go through, and we have a large-sized baler at that, but we just barely made it. So then our family, 15 of us, flew back to present the tree to Mrs. Bush. So it was hauled up the driveway to the north portico on my horse and wagon.
Oh,
and,
must have been a beautiful sight to see, huh?
yeah. And then we presented it to Mrs. Bush, and then she had us in for 15-minute private audience with our family.
Okay.
And
did you actually get
so
to
we
meet the president as well?
At another occasion.
Uh-huh.
But Mrs. Bush posed for pictures with each of our children
Oh.
with with their children,
Mhm.
and very gracious lady. And then, let's see, that was on well, anyhow, we had, Mr. Walters, the usher, had asked us if there's anything we wanted. And so we had asked for a tour of the White House. So on that preceding Sunday afternoon, we were given a private tour.
Oh.
And then we'd also asked for a tour of the grounds. And following the, following our tour of the White House, we were asked to come out to the South Portico to see the president coming back from Thanksgiving holiday.
Oh.
And so they had us all standing on the stairs there. It goes up to the upper porch. And when they landed, and then they walked over to the house, and President Bush walked over to us and said, "Are these the Christmas tree people?" "It's the Christmas tree people." We said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, let's take a picture." So he called his photographers over, and he and Mrs. Bush posed with our whole family.
Well, I think that's a real honor for you and your family and the state of Oregon. And have there been other occasions when Oregon provided the Christmas tree as well?
Yeah, one other time. The year, just so happened the year before.
Who was that?
Gary Sander from Corvallis had been the winner.
Hmm.
So 2 years in a row, Oregon had it.
Mm-hmm.
One interesting little sidelight on the year we did it. That was election year, and Ross Perot was running then.
Oh, I remember.
And he heard about them getting a Christmas tree from way out in Oregon, and he tried to make some political hay out of it. And I was getting calls from the media and all about it, and he couldn't see why they had to go through Oregon and get a tree. He said, "I don't get my tree from Oregon." And we're not so sure he does, and he lives in Texas, and a lot of Oregon trees go to Texas.
He maybe doesn't know where his trees are
One
from.
of the Oregon growers sent him one.
This one showing your tape, maybe you want to see these pictures.
All right.
Okay. Well, we're just about to wind up here. And I want to thank you so much for chatting with me this morning and telling the story about the White House Christmas tree. That's wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I want, just on behalf of everybody, I guess, to say thanks for all the good things that you do for us down at the legislature and for your service there in Salem. And we'll be following it very carefully this year to see what all happens. I wish you the very best with getting the legislation through that we need.
Well,
And thanks for spending the time with me this morning and becoming a part of our Past Presidents series, this historical project here that I'm working on for OSWA. So, any final word for us, Bob?
Well, I hope it'll be of some value in the future to know what we did in the old days.
All right.
And certainly want people to feel that they can come to see me in Salem or call me with legislative concerns, because I'm there to represent the people and try and do my best to do it.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Yep.